Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Ray, and we've got a fantastic workshop webinar this morning on everybody's favorite subject, driver shortage. Today's March the 4th, 2021. And today we're going to be talking about feedback from your drivers, how to get that feedback, what to do with that feedback once you get it from a company, Mr. Max Farrell, the founder of WorkHound.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to get you to hold for a moment. It does not look like the attendees were opened up yet. We haven't had anyone join yet.
Yeah, Katie's on mute. Katie.
I hit start. The webinar has begun.
Okay, here we go. Max will be joining us with WorkHound. Joining him, Mr. Jim Frank, president of the Elite Fleet National Carriers, now located in Dallas, Texas, and his usage of that of this information, as well as Mr. Craig Hart, our customer development executive at Affinity Workforce Solutions. Welcome everybody again. Driver shortage, driver feedback will be our topic for today. And here we are. It's March the 4th. Driver shortage is real. Rates are up. Freight activity is up. Equipment sitting idle. So the missing component is obviously the drivers, and everybody is struggling with that issue. And we'll present to everyone today a very specific program that can help identify the issues your drivers are having to prevent them from entering that retention turnover cycle. So if everybody would please open up your chat feature and give us some feedback on what you are doing out in the field, or if you're even having, maybe some of you are not having the driver shortage issues, but please open up your chat feature at the bottom and we'll get started. So what's our industry doing to address the driver shortage? I've heard everything from increasing rate of pay to sign-on bonuses, more modern equipment, home frequency promises, dispatcher soft skill training, on and on and on. A lot of entry-level driving training programs. So there's a lot of different strategies to address this driver shortage. But today we want to talk with Max and Jim specifically about how you can get a neutral party to address this issue and get the feedback from them. So before we get too deep into this, I've introduced myself, Max, Jim, and Craig. We're having a few little delays with the program. I hope everybody's out there. Max, before we get started, I know you've got a lot of information to share, a lot of 2020 data that you've recovered from drivers. As a matter of fact, I think you've gotten 38,500 driver feedback comments in 2020, and we're certainly looking forward to that. But before we get into that, were there any surprises, and what did you see drivers saying in 2020 from different from prior years?
Well, first and foremost, the biggest difference was the fact that we've been in the middle of a pandemic, and COVID-19 was certainly something front and center that was not mentioned at all in 2019. It was definitely something that we saw mentioned significantly in 2020. And, you know, as we look out, independent of that, if we look at 2019 to 2020, what we saw is that there was a lot of positive feedback that we weren't isolating and recognizing. And so in 2019, we saw that about a third of our data was positive feedback, and we created a praise theme to help companies isolate that information. You know, something else that we saw was that the issue of healthy communication touched almost every problem that drivers face. So something that we'll get into here shortly is that with pay, often it's a communication issue more so than an exact amount issue. Although the comment volumes by themes were really consistent year to year, we did see more critical comments about people surface in 2020 compared to 2019. Whereas in 2019, there were there's a higher volume of comments around external factors and technology like new ELDs, cameras, government regulations, that sort of thing. So those are some of the immediate takeaways we saw.
So the praise theme, you mentioned, tell us a little bit about that. Is that praising, tell us a little bit about the praise theme and how that works.
Yeah, so with praise, it's that, as you can imagine, kind of like if somebody leaves a review on Yelp or Google, often it's either really good or bad. And usually if somebody's frustrated, they're going to leave a longer comment. And in our data, we saw that a negative comment is going to be 2 to 3 times longer than your average comment, whereas a positive comment is going to be about half as long. And people are just short and sweet about the things that they have to say, and it doesn't neatly fall into a particular category. They may just say something like, I'm having a great week, or I love working here. That doesn't necessarily fall into equipment or people or comments about operations. So being able to isolate those small things and share, hey, we're getting a lot of attaboys. They're just short, sweet, and to the point, but we still need to pause, reflect, and recognize them. And that's what we did there.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I know you've got a lot of information. I know you've got Mr. Jim Frank joining you. Before we turn over the formal presentation, if you would please open up your chat, tell us what you're doing out in the field, what your observations are, what your experience has been using, whether it's a sign-on bonus, whether it's a entry-level driver training program, or if you're not having any driver shortage issues at all, let us know. If you could just add that to the chat feature. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you, Max. So tell us what the drivers are saying in 2020.
Happy to do it. So first off, I do want to thank everyone for attending. And as Mark shared, we're going to dig into driver feedback from 2020, which is a year unlike any other. What we did is we took feedback across our entire population of drivers who use WorkHound so that we can equip the industry to make change happen and ultimately retain more drivers. Before we get started, I do want to thank a few people from the WorkHound team for making this presentation possible. I do want to thank Mark Ellers, Corey Banks, Paul Castronova, and Katie Love for putting this report and this data together. So thank you all enough, or I can't thank you all enough. So we'll cover a few different topics today. So first off, we'll discuss how WorkHound feedback is gathered. We'll also discuss some of the summary statistics we saw across different themes. We'll really dig into the top 3 feedback themes, and also bring in Jim from National Carriers to talk about how carriers are using this data to make change happen. And finally, we'll open it up to Q&A at the end of this. So at WorkHound, we gather anonymous real-time feedback from thousands of frontline workers across the country. And in trucking, we receive driver feedback from drivers via regular text message asking drivers to share how work is going and why they feel that way. And our focus in helping trucking companies and the drivers is to create a real-time feedback loop, as you see in this image. So weekly, we're asking drivers to share the good, the bad, and the ugly through a text message link that is live 24/7. They share exactly what's on their mind in 90 seconds or less. Feedback is continuously reviewed using keyword and sentiment analysis, and we take every comment that's unfiltered and categorize it into standardized themes. And there's a few reasons.
Max, you found as a neutral party that the drivers are more open with their observations and comments?
Absolutely. It's the ugly truth of this industry is that there is a fear of retaliation. And so being able to give a platform to share anonymous feedback, but do it whenever they're feeling a certain way is really powerful, because in this business, a guy can be happy on Tuesday, fed up on Wednesday, and quit by the end of the week. It's that volatile. So being proactive instead of reactive is the right way to move forward. But as far as why we do gather feedback this way, first off, we're not a traditional survey. We ask open-ended questions so drivers can introduce their honest concerns, so that they can share what's on their mind, and carriers can get to the point of addressing those sorts of things. And we want to make sure that it's addressed in a quick fashion, so you really can get to the meat of issues at the speed of business. And then finally, we want to close the feedback loop, because getting feedback is good, taking action is better, but telling people what we did builds worker confidence and loyalty. So understanding how we close the feedback loop is important for the data we share today. So once we get feedback from drivers and address them, we know that we're able to continue to evolve how the company operates. And so we see companies address this feedback in a few different ways. One would be addressing urgent issues individually with their drivers. And we're able to actually measure how many people they retain from that. We also see companies act on feedback to improve the company. So using the data as operational intelligence to make either small or significant strategic changes. And then finally, we see companies respond back to the entire fleet in a fleet-wide message we call a broadcast, to share, hey, here's the actions we're taking, here's the initiatives we're looking into, and here's some of the miscommunications. And as we think about the demographics of the industry, we do see that the average age of drivers is about 55. It varies across companies. 95% of drivers are using smartphones daily. Across the industry, the average annual driver turnover is around 90%. And there is a driver shortage, where we're seeing over 50,000 driver shortage across the country. And so you combine all these factors together, and it makes a really strong incentive for companies to want to fill up the leaky bucket and patch it up as best as possible.
And
so in
demand,
2020,
demand for services is up. There's plenty of freight out there to haul right now.
it definitely is. I can't tell you how many times we talk to a company that, if we've got a driver, if you've got a driver, we've got a truck and we've got freight. I mean, that's the reality across the industry right now. As we looked at the summary statistics across our data, we had over 38,000 comments from more than 13,000 drivers who left about 3 comments per person on average. And so this is for companies that usually have over 100 drivers. We have companies that have 100 all the way to several thousand. And we saw that the average satisfaction score on a scale of 1 to 10 was 6.39. So I do want to look at the comment volume by theme, because if you look, in 2020, we noticed that logistics was the most common topic of feedback. And that sort of feedback really ties into to operational data. And so today, because logistics tends to appear along with other themes, we'll talk mostly about people, pay, equipment, praise, and the COVID theme, because we have been navigating a pandemic. Something that you'll notice is that while communication as a theme didn't make the top 5, it also appears that many of the themes highlighting the importance of clear and concise communication with drivers is key. When we look at the distribution of critical comments, we see that despite being frequently commented on, issues around equipment tend not to be as urgent as other themes like people and pay. In 2020, driver feedback trends show that greater attention should be focused on people and pay, and so we'll be spending the extra time on those 2 sections today rather than the other areas of the business, since those contain a higher density of retention opportunities. So we'll look at those shortly. Despite the challenges
when you talk, excuse me, Max, when you mean logistics, are you talking operation, dispatch, information load exchange between the driver and the back office? Is that logistics?
That is a great question. Yes, it is. It is pretty much everything operations related, but it is the logistics of moving the freight. So it's those sorts of interactions. Challenges with shippers. It really is a broad category.
Load assignments and pre-plans and things like that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so then as we look at the comment sentiment, you can see it's broken out pretty evenly across negative, neutral, and positive. But we did see more positive comments in 2020 than in 2019, which is kind of surprising given the turmoil that we faced last year. And as you can see, positive is orange, neutral is gray, and blue represents the negative comments. And I know trucking always has a bad habit of trying to fix what's broken, but there's a sizable number of drivers that are celebrating what's working well. And it's important that we recognize those things. Now, when it comes to breaking out the sentiment by theme, it's not evenly distributed. As you can see, praise, people, and uncategorized comments have a greater likelihood of being positive than the comments of the other themes. And with that, I do want to jump into the people theme now, which is the third most frequently mentioned theme, representing about 20% of all the comments that we received. So outside of the praise theme, it's the most likely theme to have a positive sentiment, with 38% of the comments being positive. Commenters with the people theme frequently will shout out others. The companies that we work with are maximizing the impact of this positivity by distributing these shout outs through their other internal channels. Now, when comments in the people theme are negative, it's likely due to interpersonal or departmental conflict. And it brings up a point around drivers facing a boundary spanning role. Because drivers are uniquely suited to their role to have regular interactions with a wide variety of other roles, we've named multiple populations with unique drivers whom they're often associated with, whether that's dispatchers, shippers, the planners, other people inside the company. And so while most drivers sign on to do a job so they can drive, they're not often trained to understand how to manage the needs of these various conflicting roles. And researchers at the University of Arkansas suggest that trucking is stressful, not only because of the usual suspects of stress induced by the job, but because of the expectation to juggle the relationships and interactions, often with conflicting organizational goals and expectations. Because they must interact with various company employees and try to meet customer expectations, and they're also juggling being that representative of the company to the outside world. So it's a lot to balance. So when it comes to people data, you got to wonder, who are drivers talking about? And the vast majority of comments are evenly distributed between interactions with drivers, support staff, and managers. So managers appear in comments around 34% of the time. And while it may be expected that the relationship between drivers and managers is contentious, most often it's actually pretty positive. However, one bad interaction between a driver and a manager will cause drivers to quickly express a desire to leave. Now, as we look at support staff, we did break out the support staff feedback to understand the challenges across a company. So with dispatchers, it made up 40% of support staff comments. When drivers feel that dispatchers aren't communicating back or responding in a timely manner, then they may feel like they can't do their job effectively. So it's essential that drivers feel supported by staff and that their work is met with equal efforts from dispatchers. When it comes to maintenance, downtime at the shop means lost earnings to the driver. However, when drivers lose trust in shop staff, it can be a recipe for disaster, because it's not an issue of money, but also of safety. Drivers that don't trust the shop staff may not feel safe on the road. And when it comes to office staff, the primary concern is that they may be rude or disrespectful. So it may make drivers reluctant to deal with office staff, meaning small problems have the potential to become much bigger over time. When it comes to planners, the data suggests that drivers have the most conflict here. And in the eyes of drivers, poor planning is often the source of many problems that they believe can be prevented. So the issue becomes compounded when they don't understand why last-minute changes are made. It can feel like planners are being dishonest and that favoritism is a factor. So something that we mentioned earlier was around the importance of communication being associated with these issues, and it's definitely the case. So we think of addressing people issues in a few different ways. We talked about drivers being in a boundary spanning role. And so we should remember that it's a stressful career because drivers are expected to juggle a multitude of relationships and interactions representing various, often conflicting organizational goals and expectations. So your company can help by creating initiatives that build the familiarity between drivers and support staff needed to develop trust and mutual respect. Additionally, Clear communication can be your solution to informal networks or the rumor mill. The driver community counts on each other for information when the company fails to make something clear. So we recommend being transparent about changes to policy and workflow so drivers don't need to rely on informal networks for important information. And lastly, we encourage you to help new team members. So when a new team member, like a new driver, is having trouble acclimating, it's hard on everyone. Drivers that are more experienced feel like they're picking up the slack when new people aren't prepared for their role. So we recommend ensuring adequate training at all levels of the organization to alleviate the burden from veteran drivers who feel responsible for orienting new people. So Jim, I do want to bring you in here because we all know that trucking is a people business. So does this people data reflect what you've been experiencing at National?
Well, and I think you say many times, people don't leave jobs, they leave people, that or something to that effect. But it's very true. I mean, we've worked hard to build a family environment here and know our drivers and meet their needs and have an open door policy so they can walk throughout the building and go in anybody's office. My door's closed now, but typically it's open. So it is all about the people. It's about building that relationship. And that's one of the keys. And it's something we work hard at and have for years.
And so, you know, something that we talked about when we were discussing this this conversation last week was how do you use data like this to prioritize training? Have you all seen using some of this feedback to prioritize what are we going to work on next to coach up drivers?
Oh, absolutely. And it's driven a lot of things, whether it be not understanding payroll, because sometimes it's a little convoluted, that statement they get. And so we put a series of videos out to clarify that. And you take the feedback, and a lot of times it is training. It's helping them understand. But so we get pretty active when it comes to training and process changes and things that have come out of the feedback we've gotten.
That's awesome.
And Jim, you're a subscriber to the Infinity Work. You use the Infinity platform to assign this content?
Yes. And we also have it on our YouTube channel. I think one of your guys told us last week we've got 145 custom videos out there.
Really? Custom content for national carriers?
Yes.
And some of that is designed and developed based on the feedback you're getting from Max and his team.
Yeah, and we're going to be hitting 3 years with Max, and there's a lot of those videos that are driven directly by the feedback we've gotten from WorkHound.
Makes sense.
Wow.
Makes perfect sense.
And I know the people theme is just one element of it. So I do want to jump into the next theme to look at the critical comments around logistics, which, you know, Mark, as we talked about, are often about planning and scheduling. And so what we noticed as we looked at that data was that there's a strong crossover between people feedback and logistics feedback. Drivers often share that their concern in operations or logistics is actually related to a person or a job responsibility. So in each of the scenarios, like planning or scheduling or lack of work or lost time, the drivers mentioned here in their comments that the people or communication are at the core of their concerns. So as we've mentioned, logistics touches on a lot of themes. So being aware of how these concerns intersect with other areas of the business can help you improve communication and relationships between drivers and the staff. So we have a few recommendations, starting with improved transparency. So keep drivers in the loop when you're making changes that would affect planning, scheduling, load specifics, or even the expected length of their workday, so that we ensure that drivers have enough time to adjust their life schedules accordingly. So if something's going to change, to communicate about why and when is key. And if it's abrupt change, let them know you understand that it's a problem and that you're going to look for ways to improve in the future, because problems are going to happen. Now, another thing that we talk about often in the industry is setting expectations. So drivers feel like they are being intentionally deceived or set up for failure when they're unable to meet the expectations of the company, or when they're feeling like the staff has lied to them. So making sure that all support staff, including recruiters, are setting realistic expectations when speaking with potential and current drivers is beneficial. Now, many customers were hit hard during COVID, and plenty of carriers had to explore new options to find freight. Some drivers felt left in the dark when freight dried up, and they didn't receive any acknowledgement from their employers about what was going on. So letting drivers know that you're working on potential solutions can help keep morale high within the workforce. So now let's jump into pay. Now, pay was the fourth most common theme that we saw, representing just over 17% of all comments. Now, this theme is notoriously negative, as more than 50% of all pay comments are negative. Now, many people in the industry assume that this is mainly because of drivers demanding higher pay, but our feedback indicates the comments about rates and bonuses are twice as likely to be critical compared to comments but compared to other pay comments. And so it signals that these are retention opportunities. But the data is a bit more nuanced. Though some drivers are unhappy with their pay rate, most drivers are commenting about pay because they need assistance navigating complex pay systems. So even greater numbers of commenters express concerns that they're expected to do a lot of work that's uncompensated, or they fear that they aren't getting enough work to meet their financial objectives. So it's clear from our data that setting realistic pay expectations with drivers and working with them to make certain that they meet their financial goals has more of an impact on driver satisfaction than pay rate. So while pay feedback is highly nuanced, we want to dig a little deeper into the intersection between pay and equipment in the next segment that we talk about. So instead of going deep on all the concerns, I want to focus specifically on this stat from last year's feedback. What we discovered is that often pay comes in the form of questions. So at 41% of comments about pay, that means that more than 1/3 of questions than comments are in there compared to any other thing. So many assume that comments about pay are mainly complaints about the pay rate. However, the abundance of questions in the feedback indicates the commenters seek clarification about complex pay policies and structures. It's not simply an opportunity to vent frustrations. They really want clarification. So Jim, I do want to get your take on this, because from our findings, a lot of pay feedback really stems from communication challenges. So is that what you've experienced as well?
Oh, absolutely. And you got to use the KISS method when it comes to payroll. We'll just keep it simple. It's the more you convolute your pay with, if you do this, we'll do that, the more confusing it becomes for the driver, and they've got a lot of time to think out there. And if they don't understand it, they're going to think it negatively. And so we've tried to keep it simple. We have got a lot of videos out there explaining just the statement so they can read it, because the statement was designed by an accountant, not by a truck driver. So yeah, a lot of it stems from confusion. It stems from not making cutoff times. And we work hard every day to make sure that, and I can tell you our payroll is improved tremendously in the last 4 or 5 years. Just in making some simple changes and communicating it and making it easier for the driver to understand can save a lot of heartache on both sides of it.
And that's
Just
a great point.
Just explaining the process and how to get reimbursed for expense, just the basic things.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Blocking and tackling is key. So I do want to look at equipment as the next theme to focus on, because it was the second most common theme in driver concerns. So let's look at equipment feedback. So when drivers have feedback to share about equipment, it tends to be urgent, and likely something is broken or drivers haven't been properly trained on how something works. So 20% of equipment feedback was about maintenance. And oftentimes it's about the shop not actually fixing the reported issue or requiring multiple trips to the shop to fix the same issue. Drivers also shared concerns about timeliness of repairs or an understaffed shop. These concerns related directly back to drivers not getting paid for work that isn't driving. Downtime equals a down paycheck. Additionally, feedback about facilities made up about 14% of equipment feedback. This includes yard conditions, parking availability, the status of restrooms and showers, and other driver amenities like Wi-Fi, the driver's lounge, and laundry. Drivers also shared feedback about the lack of empty trailers and the cleanliness of trucks in scenarios where drivers are slip seating, And this is important because drivers want to represent your company well and indicate that the truck cleanliness is a display of respect. Frustrations around maintenance of trucks and trailers are the top critical concern for equipment-related feedback. So we have a few recommendations to address these kinds of challenges. And first, it starts with expectations. So setting realistic expectations around shop wait times and encouraging drivers to be proactive in anticipating the needed maintenance can go a long way. We also recommend investing in high quality training for shop staff. This will go a long way in keeping drivers happy and moving, but also retaining your shop staff. Building trust between drivers and the shop by setting a communication policy that ensures maintenance is properly executing and communicating what they worked on is also really beneficial. Now, when it comes to facilities, they are another serious concern for drivers. A few small challenges can go a long way. So proactively anticipating and repairing potholes is big. These lead to greater frustrations for drivers if equipment is damaged on the yard, which will ultimately lead to a trip to the shop that could have been prevented if the yard was in better shape. So ample parking at yards is also key, and making sure available trailers are the ultimately basic expectations drivers have to do their job. And finally, drivers are away from home, so your facilities are often their home away from home. So managing and maintaining these amenities are a sign of respect. And I'm glad to have Jim on the conversation today to discuss the changes that national carriers has made over the past year, because based on driver feedback, National wound up offering a new app to help find empty trailers. They opened up a ton of parking for drivers in their Liberal, Kansas facility upgrade, and they also installed new hot showers. So Jim, I'd love to get your take on how your team has been using some of this driver feedback to roll up your sleeves and make changes.
Well, I think the trailer app is something that we were getting complaints about, and especially in a large plant setting where there's hundreds of trailers and they don't segregate them by company, they're just where they are. So we build an app with our partner, our vendor, and they can put in their trailer number and it'll give them the location, and it's within feet. So they don't have to go hunting around and looking for trailer numbers and et cetera. And so that came directly out of feedback from WorkHound. We opened a new facility in our Liberal, Kansas, which is actually our headquarters. We had been on the plant property. We built a $5.5 million facility near the plant, and we're able to put in driver lounge with showers and things that we haven't had for them before, because they tend to go there and take their 10-hour break at minimum before that load of meat's ready to leave. So that's had a big impact. That's just opened up about 6 weeks ago.
Jim, I noticed you said they had new hot showers. Did you have cold showers before?
Yeah, it was a hose out back.
Okay, that makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. It's what you guys put together is awesome. Well, I do want to jump to the next section, which is something we all had to deal with, which is COVID-19.
Max, I had to run one quick question for you. We talked about pay and equipment.
Yeah.
What, home time gets a lot of press. Have you ever compared comments on home time to pay? Which is which one gets more comments?
So pay certainly gets more comments because it factors into more things, whereas home time is it's critical, but it's only brought up every once in a while when that critical moment happens. It is like, if you look at the percentage of comments that are make or break, a higher percentage of home time comments are going to be, if we don't address this, we could be looking at an empty truck type responses from drivers. Whereas with pay, as we talked about, a lot of them are just, hey, I don't understand this, or this doesn't make sense, or I feel like it's wrong. So there's a lot more pay chatter than home time. But when home time's brought up, you better be on top of it, or otherwise you could be looking at an empty truck. So that's what we've seen.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I do want to jump into COVID-19 because 2020 was a year unlike any other, and it was the first time we started documenting COVID-19 specific comments. We first started getting this sort of feedback in February as the signs of the pandemic started to bubble up. And the comments were often about safety or how their employers were going to help them secure personal protective equipment. These comments resulted in carriers tightening up their communication processes and becoming innovative in how they kept drivers in the loop on the ever-changing information in the early stages of the pandemic. So the feedback that we've received since has been focused on vaccines and continued support for drivers as they face additional challenges with the pandemic. So while COVID-19 mentions were overall a small percentage of comments across the platform last year, they were highly critical. The percentage of the comments considered critical never dropped below 27% and even peaked at close to 40% during last year. Now, 59% of all the comments referencing COVID-19 came to us in March and April and were included in some early COVID-19 reports that we put together. And so with the immediate uncertainty felt by everyone, drivers were still on roadways doing their jobs with an urgent need for guidance. In April, about 23% of all the feedback was about COVID-19. And while the volume of these comments has shrunk, we noticed an increase in negative comment sentiment during both peaks of COVID-19 rising across the United States. So our take on this is that it was that during those times, drivers were experiencing the most uncertainty and pressure, and they were looking to their employers for guidance and stability. So for example, during these times, we often saw the most concerns about potentially getting loved ones sick or feeling unsupported by the possibility of getting sick. So we're nearly a year into this pandemic, and it's never too late to improve how we navigate it or to learn from it. And so we encourage companies to be proactive in your communications about resources like testing, test results, quarantine requirements, and now vaccines. So letting your drivers know that that you have their back and will support them on their intentions to do the responsible thing is really powerful. So for example, we see driver comments like this where they're sharing that they feel concerned about losing pay for something outside of their control. This is an even bigger concern if the drivers have been potentially exposed to COVID-19 on the job. Additionally, drivers are simply looking for answers on the vaccination and when they're able to access it. In many locations across the country, personal protective equipment is still required. And so if the company policy requires PPE, we encourage companies to make sure they provide it and that you enforce it for everyone, not just for the driving population. Because we've seen comments where drivers say they want a free mask, or companies that we work with, they'll use that as an opportunity to provide branded company masks and branded hand sanitizer in order to signal that you hope they're supporting their safety and that they value their role on the team. And we also see drivers talk about maskless customer interactions because they want to make sure that safety is in place. Now, lastly, we do think it's important to double check the double standards within company culture because drivers often feel like second-class citizens. So when they're required to wear a mask, but they watch office staff interact without a mask, it makes them feel like there's a double standard out there. And that we've seen other drivers acknowledge that office staff are able to travel and return to work despite potentially being exposed to COVID, potentially putting others at risk. So COVID certainly was and is heavy for all of us. So hopefully we can shift to something more positive and look at one of our favorite themes, which is praise. Now, praise, as we talked about earlier, was created in early 2020 after noticing in our 2019 analysis that a large subset of uncategorized comments was generally positive. So people would say things like, I love this company, or I'm grateful to work here, and they landed in this zone. And this feedback is strategically really important for understanding what's working well to retain drivers. So 15% of all the comments fell in this theme. The praise comments are often shorter than regular comments. They're just concise and to the point. When it comes to the topics of people, nearly half of all the praise comments mentioned people specifically. Drivers are very likely to share their positive experiences when teammates go above and beyond. So we share some examples of what drivers have said about what they like about a company. Now, praise has been a huge part of worker feedback in 2020, and companies are using it to their advantage in recruiting because it's no secret happy drivers make great recruiters. So we're seeing companies use the praise data in a few ways. They encourage referrals from folks that are happy after leaving positive comments. They'll share the praise comments with the staff to boost morale. They'll share them as testimonials in social media channels, and tell the recruiting team, use these specific comments when you're talking to a potential hire. So praise can be used in a lot of different ways. And so as we wrap up this part of the conversation and get ready for Q&A, I just want to share that we know the world has changed drastically in the past year. So if I've learned anything, it's that we're all struggling with something, and it's just known that we're not going to be 100% every day. The past 12 months have taught us a lot about how it's important to be more empathetic, and listening to people is a great place to start. So while communication challenges were a common thread throughout all the themes in the 2020 feedback, it's clear now more than ever that when we listen and understand where drivers are coming from, we act quickly and we tell them what we did, great things will happen. And so with that, let's open up the floor for questions.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of information to take in. We've got a couple of questions here. Here's one that we'll start off with. And this is, I guess, for Jim, how do you keep an open door policy in the wake of COVID when it's discouraged to move around in different departments? I tell my employees to stop by with the message on top down to stay away from other people as much as possible. So that's a good question. How do you maintain an open door policy?
Well, we're masked up. Drivers that come in are masked up. There hasn't been as much activity in the last year as there has previously, and we've had surprisingly few cases until the last 6-8 weeks of COVID-19 amongst our OTR drivers. Of course, they kind of self-isolate anyway because they're in that cab by themselves for 10-14 hours a day, but had surprisingly few people of our OTR driver force catch it. Our COVID procedures around the office are very stringent. We sanitize the office on a regular basis. We keep social distance. We've got panels up between work areas, and we've been, knock wood, we've been blessed. We haven't been hit that hard here in our offices in Irving. But a lot of the drivers don't come in. We don't have the traffic we had a year ago. But it's important to me that we keep an open environment and that they feel comfortable coming in, talking to us, and most of that face-to-face is actually very, very pleasant. We don't get a lot of guys that are upset don't want to talk to you, but we do have that atmosphere, and we're going to maintain it regardless of what's around us.
Well, I think our industry has responded exceptionally well to the whole pandemic problem, and applaud management like yourself as well as the drivers out in the field. I did have a question for Craig. If you're on the line with us, Craig, we've talked about this data and this information that you can receive from the field, and Jim obviously takes that and uses that as a theme for custom content and assignment to drivers. Can you elaborate on how that can the Infinity Workforce Solutions platform can help facilitate that?
Absolutely. And actually, it's also a great callback to that COVID discussion, because we experienced similar trends at Infinity Workforce when the COVID restrictions started happening. We had an overwhelming response from existing clients as well as folks looking for additional communication options about, hey, I need to get this information communicated out to my drivers today on what we need them to be able to do in their trucks, how to clean the interiors if they're slip seating, how we want to run our recruiting process going forward so we minimize as much in-person contact as possible. And Jim does a very good job with Nashville. I would even say that they, with the number of content pieces that they have in play, that you were on the aggressive side, Jim, which is great in terms of being able to share what Nashville needs their people specifically to know about your business so that they can continue to function properly. But the Infinity platform makes that available to any organization, not just the training aspect of it, which we do have the library that does that, but also those just internal touches that you need to be doing on a regular basis so that people feel that they're being responded to, that they're being listened to, that they're being cared about, that they're being taken into consideration when plans are being made, when disruptive events like a society global spanning plague comes about. I mean, it's literally something that very few people alive to this day have ever experienced, and this was not something that people were prepared to address and deal with. There will be now going forward, but no one had a plague response plan in place the moment that this all the restrictions went into place. They had to come up with something, had to communicate that effectively, had to make sure that people could respond and ask questions as they needed. So yes, that is something that our platform gets used for now every day by multiple companies around the country, because you're dealing with drivers potentially from coast to coast.
Well, Jim mentioned we talked custom content. Tell what is custom content and how hard is that to put into action?
Sure. Custom content is basically anything specific to your group that you would like to share. It can range from just sharing a PDF document of, say, if Jim wanted to send out a PDF about the new shower facilities that are available. He wouldn't necessarily want to make a video describe that, though he certainly, but he just wanted something that he could send out. It could be a PDF or Word document. We do have people that engage professional services to film unique videos. We have other people that take pride in putting together their own content and making it their own and giving it some personality. So that is an option, but it's really a large umbrella under what custom content can be. But I don't want people to be intimidated by the prospect of it. It can be very, very simple. It can be content that is shot on your phone. I mean, the cameras in your average smartphone these days is more than sufficient for you to be able to record a message very quickly that could be incorporated and communicated out to a driver. So no, I think it's very interesting. Some of the trends that you see and that we see on the safety side in the training world, Max, is that maintenance, high priority on the communications that you receive. Maintenance, continual item that people are getting flagged for in roadside inspections and offsite audits. These things are still continuing to occur and are primary drivers of negative impacts on trucking companies. So I found this data very interesting because it parallels very much what we see on our safety world as well. So, but no, this is exciting. Now, if someone, Max, wanted to take advantage of a system like WorkHound, how would they go about doing that? How would they go about getting that in place for their organization?
Well, I mean, for us, what we do is just have a conversation of how our platform works and what is a company trying to solve. Because we always believe you should fall in love with solving the problem and not with the solution. But if companies are wanting to get a handle on addressing why are people abruptly leaving and not knowing why, let's be proactive and do what we can to keep them before they walk out the door. But I'd say even more importantly, how do we use data over a series of months, ultimately years, to use it as operational intelligence? Because driver feedback is a goldmine. It'll tell us where we need to improve, which customers are bad, which managers need to be promoted, and which managers need to be maybe transitioned elsewhere. That data is incredibly powerful. So for us, then we work with companies to figure out what's the best way to manage this, because what gets measured gets managed. And then, what is the right way to implement this? Because it's important to educate drivers about this new thing, about getting feedback. And so we'll even pick up the phone and call influential drivers as part of our rollout process. Because Jim, I'm sure you know this firsthand. If you talk to the 5 of the right guys that are talkative, you'll talk to 500 real quick.
That's true. Very true.
Excellent. Now, we did have a question come in for you, Jim. So you use WorkHound, you use Infinity Workforce. Are there other technology platforms that you use to help communicate out with your folks?
Yeah, obviously our telematics in the truck, we do fleet broadcasts on a regular basis, whether it be maintenance tips, weather warnings. When there were all the riots and protests going on, as to what we knew, we didn't want to be rumor mongers, but what we knew. So we use that extensively. We're very active on Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media, YouTube. We've got a guy that is 75% of his time is spent on social media. So he's the one that puts that content together that's on your site. He does it with his phone and then edits it through his laptop. So we try to be out in front of everything as much as we can. And it's difficult, especially this in 2020 with the pandemic, but you got to work through it, and it is what it is.
Now, that's actually great that you bring up social media. We had our boot camp event last week, and we had a client on speaker out of Indiana, George Girth, with Grammar Logistics, and he talked about how he's absolutely using social media right now to recruit and communicate every day. And I just want to say, for those on the call that are not taking advantage of social media as an opportunity to share your messaging, to recruit, to increase your footprint, you are behind the curve already. So your competitors, like national carriers, are already out there doing it. So,
and on a weekly basis, we get one or two guys that come in and say, "I've been following you on YouTube for a long time."
Excellent. So you're telling me, Jimmy, you don't film most of the content. You are not the star of the content.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to.
I understand.
deflate it.
I understand. I would love to tell you there's a large line of people fighting Mark and I to host our webinars on a weekly basis, but you'd be wrong. So that's excellent. So that is excellent.
Well, if we can go to the next slide, I think there's go to the next slide. Can go, maybe not. Okay, well, Max, we certainly appreciate. Here's one other question here. Our biggest opportunity in over-the-road drivers leaving for local jobs for less pay. You've heard that one before. And the question is, could driver surveys be an answer or help in that a leak that this is what Mr. Torres is experiencing with over-the-road drivers going local for less pay?
Well, I mean, we're seeing the same thing.
Jim, you see that too? Yeah.
I mean, in regards to the question here, yes, that trend is happening across the industry. People saying they are leaving for, usually it's pay or home time, but often drivers aren't wanting to burn a bridge when they share those things. So it could have been that something went wrong in working at that company to where they said, okay, now it's time for me to look somewhere else. Oh, maybe I'll look for a local job. So there could have been a spark that caused them to say, now it's time to shift somewhere else. So yeah, I definitely think getting honest feedback throughout to get a pulse check of what people are thinking and feeling, and maybe how can the job evolve, can keep some of those folks. Because what I've seen more in the industry in the past 18 months than I have historically is companies starting to rethink the role and create more of a hub and spoke model instead of a true OTR model. You know, more companies are talking about being regional, where they can get somebody home, if not daily, home every other day or at least weekly. So the dynamics of what a week over week job looks like is shifted. And Jim, I'd be curious to get your take. Are you seeing that sort of evolution as well?
Well, yes. I mean, more and more, especially as capacity tightens, more and more shippers are looking for a dedicated opportunity, for a dedicated fleet to come in, and we've been active in that. We just started one up about 40 trucks about 60 days ago. So that, you know, it's not all about money for the drivers. It's about quality of life. And sometimes that quality of life changes. Relationships with their families change, and they make it change. Yeah, it may be because something sparked it, but I think the vast majority of it is that something changed in their lives. Maybe a new infant, maybe a new girlfriend, whatever it may be. Something changed that took them off the road.
That's a great point.
Jim, I know we're about to close, and I'm not sure why we're not able to get the screen for information exchange. But let me ask Jim just an observation question. ATRI says driver shortage is #1 this year, last year, year before. How are you at national carriers experiencing a driver shortage, and how big is that issue for you?
It's our number one issue as well. We our turnover is down year over year, and I think Max said it was 89% or something. Ours is running about 68. Last year was about 73. But so our problem is getting them in the front door, and truck driving schools closing down or limiting participation. The drug clearinghouse, older drivers. We saw a lot of retirements last year. I think they, if they're close to Social Security age, or they've been blessed, they've got the economic wherewithal to get off the road, they're getting off the road because they don't want to deal with the pandemic, especially the older drivers.
Yep.
So we saw a lot of that last year. But like I say, our turnover is down some, but it's a matter of our classes, we used to get in the low teens was an average class, and today we high five, we get double digits in orientation, and that makes a world of difference.
So you are doing entry-level driver training at some level of entry level.
Yes, CDL coming out of a qualified truck driving school, and we put them through a training program and get them on the road. And actually, we've been doing that for about 5 years, and about a third of our trucks today are manned with drivers that came out of our training program.
Well, that's the way to do it. And obviously it has challenges, but that's clearly a strategy. Another older strategy, of course, was just increase the sign-on bonus, throw more money for the sign-on bonus. Are you seeing much results with, are you using that strategy?
I'm not a believer in sign-on bonuses. I'm a believer in big referral bonuses from your existing drivers. And that's what we concentrate on. And typically referrals every week are about a third of the people that are in orientation.
Absolutely. Well, we're about to wrap everything up. I don't know, is there a poll question on the next slide? Next slide. Having a little bit of issues here. There's my contact. There's Max's contact. Here we go. If you would like a complimentary access to Infinity, hit a yes. If you would like to be contacted by WorkHound so you can start collecting and acting, hit yes. We'll certainly respond to that. Jim, we appreciate your, we had a, last week in our boot camp, we had George who managed a tanker fleet up in Indiana. And then the week before, or a couple of weeks before, we had Amber with an auto hauler out of Denver. And I get a lot of access to drivers looking around. If I find a driver looking for a refrigerated transport job, I'm going to aim them toward national carriers. Is that fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay, well, there's the poll question. We're out of time. Max, thank you very much. Getting that feedback from your drivers is you got to be careful what you ask for, because you will get the feedback. Is that a fair statement to summarize everything?
Yeah, getting feedback is good. Taking action is better, and then telling people what you did is the cherry on the sundae.
And ignore is the absolute worst thing you can do during this driver shortage.
Yeah, it's spot on. If you're not controlling the message, somebody else gladly will.
Okay, well, we appreciate that, Craig. Infinity Workforce can collaborate with this information and help design specific custom content or existing content to address those issues. And we have a 30-day free trial that's available for anybody that wants to try that out. We could hook you up as early as this afternoon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank y'all for joining us. Driver shortage, multiple strategies. It sounds to me like getting that into that feedback is important. There's some in the benefits of Infinity, but we're out of time. So thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.